A very warm welcome to all of you. We've now reached the closing plenary of day one at WCEF 2025, the circular economy as the pathway to climate and nature targets. And to join me in opening today's discussion, I'd like to invite to the stage Tuli Ietaniemi, Senior Leader at Sitra. Tuli. Thank you so much.
Diana, it's an honor to be here.
Great. Tuli, we know that the circular economy plays a crucial role in achieving climate goals by changing the way we produce and we consume goods, right? It offers a pathway to decouple economic growth from greenhouse gas emissions. In doing so, it helps create the conditions for a more sustainable and resilient economy that minimizes its impact on the climate. And Tuli, I know this is a topic you've been deeply involved, right? So please share your view with us.
Thank you, Juliana. Indeed, I think it's the beauty of circular economy that it can tackle the climate emissions, and it's a super powerful tool to do that. And I think there are just many countries that will start to use that tool, even more that we've seen so far. So things are moving forward. But you know, Juliana, I think that's only half of the truth, the things the circular economy can do for climate change, because it can also tackle nature loss. And I think that is just amazing. It wasn't very long ago that Sitra published a very interesting study. It was called Tackling Root Causes, and it was all about halting biodiversity loss through circular economy. And why I wanted to mention that is that it was the first of a kind study. And why? Because it was the first study that quantified how much circular economy can help in tackling biodiversity loss globally. So it hadn't been done before. And the result? A lot. It can help a lot. And I just want to give you one example of how much is a lot. By 2050, shifting to alternative proteins, adopting regenerative agriculture, and halving food waste could free up agricultural land equivalent to 1.5 times the size of the European Union. Oh so 1.5 times,
this is huge.
Yeah, the size of the European Union. So that's a lot, right? So I think there's so much we can achieve with circular economy, as we know. And I'm very happy to be here at the beginning of this session, because now we're going to hear about where we are with these solutions, where do we want to go, and most importantly, how do we get there? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tuli.
Yeah.
Now let's hear a bit more from economist Anis Nassar from the World Economic Forum.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Actually, Nassar, maybe you should go there. Nassar can give us the perspective on the importance of collaboration between governments and the private sector. So please, I think I'm going to give you the mic, so as you can. Okay, this is functioning. No? Hold on.
Hello? Okay,
yeah.
This will work. Thanks for the introduction, Juliana.
Thanks.
My role is going to be to share a bit of context on where we stand with the circular economy. So we will start by looking at our material consumption. How much materials are we consuming, and what kind of trend are we on with this material consumption? Once we've established that, we'll look at what are the consequences of this material consumption. What is science telling us about it? And then we'll ask, what are we doing about it? how do we address this material consumption? So first, on our material consumption. And in this room, I'm sure many of you are aware that we are consuming approximately 100 billion tons of materials every year. What's interesting to see is the path of acceleration that we are on this material consumption. We have quadrupled our material use, consumption, and disposal since the 70s. What's also interesting to see is that we have not decreased this acceleration even since we have gone through the Paris Accord, for example, where we have started to address the trend of increasing GHG emissions, potentially not as fast as we would want to, but we're seeing that this is not changing our pace of material consumption. Here is a graph that's borrowed from our colleagues at Circular Economy. You see that we're also expecting to keep increasing this material consumption. According to the Global Resource Outlook report from the IRP, we will increase by 60% by 2060. And why are we consuming more resources? Well, the answer is rather simple. There's more of us, and each one of us consumes more resources. As we've lifted people out of poverty, as our economies have developed, each one of us is consuming more resources. That's particularly true in developed countries, but also in developing countries. So why should we care? Is that an issue? We could just be consuming materials and that's it, right? But the reality is that there are consequences, of course, to this material consumption. And these consequences have been very well put in and very clearly put in the Global Resource Outlook report from last year. And increased resource use is the #1 driver of the triple planetary crisis. So it is an urgent issue. 55% of our GHG emissions are linked to material consumption, use and disposal. On the biodiversity side, it's even starker. 90% of land use biodiversity loss is linked to materials. And one that we talk about less, potentially, is on the pollution side. There's, of course, many different ways to talk about pollution, many different types of metrics, but here we've picked one, which is particulate matter health impacts. 40% of those are linked to material extraction, consumption, and disposal. So what can we do about that? We know we're going to be more people in the future, and we know we want to keep lifting people out of poverty. We want to maintain economic prosperity. So what can we do about it? Of course, asking this question to this particular room is probably silly. We know that there's a very efficient tool to decouple our economic growth from our material use, and that is to use the circular economy. Why? Because our linear systems are inefficient in their material use and are wasteful. Particularly at the end of life, we lose a lot of the value that had been created by simply landfilling and incinerating. In a circular economy, the idea is that we recover this value, we retrieve it. There's many different estimations of how big the economic opportunity is. I've chosen this one, which has been around for a while, the 4.5 trillion opportunity by 2030. So this seems like a win-win, right? We avoid environmental impacts, we seize economic opportunity, and so why are we not doing it enough? And the answer is simply because it's hard. We have been having linear systems of production and consumption for decades, centuries even. They've been optimized, and so moving from one to the other is not an easy task. However, we are seeing a lot of positive momentum if we think now about what are we doing about all of this. So businesses are starting to seize the economic opportunity that circular economy represents. Here behind me is research led by the World Economic Forum last year, where we surveyed 420 executives, and we asked them many questions. One of them was quite simple. How important is circular economy for your business? We could answer on a 0 to 5 scale, with important and very important as the higher metric. Today, or well, last summer, 75% of them said it was important or very important. That is an immense increase compared to 3 years ago, when only 40% said it was important or very important to them. And what's also interesting to see is that this perceived importance is even bigger to them in the future. So they are seeing the increasing trend. 95% of them said it would be important or very important for their businesses. From the government side, governments are also starting to act, and also, again, the trend is through acceleration. Here I've borrowed this research from our colleagues at Chatham House and UNIDO, who last year published a stocktake of where do we stand in national publications for circular economy, either action plan or circular economy roadmap, and so on. What we see is that in 2016, we had only 4 of those publications. That's just 10 years ago. And now there are 75. And this number is already outdated. Since this publication went out last year, there's even more today. We're looking at 80, 85 potentially. And Brazil, by the way, is one of the countries that joined these ranks very recently with the publication of their own circular economy national action plan. So again, a lot of positive momentum from the government side. So businesses, governments, and how are we doing now on the intergovernmental processes, the international collaboration for circular economy? So here we've chosen 2 metrics to show. So maybe first we can mention that at COP28 in the UAE, circular economy was recognized for the first time as an important tool to mitigate our climate, our GHG emissions. So that's a great step in integrating circularity in our intergovernmental processes. What we're seeing as well is that an increasing number of nationally determined contributions are including circular economy practices as a way to achieve their targets. The latest number we have, which is again slightly outdated because there has been revisions of the NDCs, and we've seen a few more include circular economy, and Brazil is one of those countries that includes circularity in their NDCs. We have now approximately 27%. Depending if you're a glass half full or half empty type person, you'll be happy about that, or you'll say, hey, actually there's a lot of opportunity to get to 100%. There's still 70% that we need to convince. On the NBSAPs side, so on the biodiversity, we don't know yet. Many of the NBSAPs are not in. It will be interesting to see once we have most of the NBSAPs in how many of those include circularity and how we can keep pushing for this circularity agenda as part of the different COPs. So my message is the following. We are consuming too much materials. We know it. There's too much environmental, social, and economic consequences to this material use. However, we're on a positive trend. There's a lot of work to do, but we are on a positive trend. And this is coming also from the work of many of you in this room. I'm thinking many of you have been pushing for this circular economy agenda. So today, we will look at how can we keep pushing for circular economy agenda as a way to deliver our climate and nature goals. And we will start by thinking, how can we include those, particularly in the intergovernmental processes through the different COPs, particularly the COP that's coming now in Brazil. And with that, I'll hand over to you again, Juliana.
Thank you so very much, James. Thank you for your insights. Now to discuss what bold policy shifts and innovations are needed to address the triple planetary crisis, I'd like to invite to the stage the president of COP30, Ambassador André Correia do Lago, and the former president of COP16, Susanna Mohammed. Please have a seat. Tudo bom? Good afternoon. So I have a question, Susanna. What elements of circularity are most critical for the implementation of global climate and natural goals? What synergies can circular economy provide given current economic and political themes of competitiveness and security?
Well, first, good afternoon to everybody, and it's really great to be here with Ambassador Andrea, and I really wish all the success to COP30 in Brazil. We are super excited for that. 2 years of environmental change in Latin America. And I think one key issue we have to think about is why do we have this capacity of extraction of resources? And that capacity and the destruction it has caused to the living systems in the planet, with the consequences that now are threatening our security, our livelihoods, and that have created, because think about it, so many resources, and at the same time, such an unequal world, where actually, per capita, people in the developed world consumes 6 times more per capita than people in the least developed countries. So it has not been for a system that creates equality, solidarity, peace in humanity. It has been for a system that has created development, but huge inequality, an environmental crisis, and actually lack of security right now. And one of the key factors is the use of fossil fuels. We have this power because of the use of fossil fuels. So then you see how decarbonization, it is not a matter of changing technology, and circular economy is not only a matter of shifting the way we produce and consume, it is as well, but that's not the only critical point. The critical point is how we change the way we live in this planet. So this power that we have gotten from fossil fuels that have created climate change, that have created the loss of biodiversity, and that has created this huge pollution, actually creates a process where the way we live as humanity can reproduce life and nature. And what we have created is a geopolitics and an economic system which is reproducing death and is reproducing actually the extinction of the living systems of the planet. So I like the circular economy process, bringing all this together, but we have to put at the center the system of power that has created this. When we see from that perspective, then we understand that we have to work together in what I call a critical mass of actors that gain enough power not to give more power to this fossil capital, to this fossil fuel economy. And right now, it's very worrying because what we're seeing politically is that on the opposite is the fossil capital politics who's again winning traction. And that requires a political shift, which requires this critical mass. Who's the critical mass? All the people in business, all the economy, all the government, all the communities, the people that are the front lines of the consequences of this destruction that can start shifting the systems into a way that we can reproduce life. So that's where you see that at the core of power, these 3 things come together, but also creating a different power, we can start shifting that system, that machinery of death that we have created.
A new mental model, right? You know, Susanna, 4 days ago, last Friday, I was in Belém. I went there and I was so excited seeing how people are involved with COP30. They are already very excited. They can't wait to see people there. And now my question is to the ambassador, what role should the circular economy play specifically at COP30 and in future climate negotiations?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm super happy to be here. This forum is amazing, and I'm so glad it's happening in Brazil. This is an extraordinary preparation for COP30. Answering your question, somehow we have to think that it's not only the negotiations. What is really important is the implementation. We've been negotiating these agreements for many years, and in the case of the Paris Accord, we have basically finished most of the things we had to negotiate under the Paris Agreement. What we need now is action. What we need is implementation. And circular economy is one of the solutions that is already presented in the presentation immediately before we were talking. Anis, I think he was showing how this is already a reality. It's not something that needs to be negotiated or something that needs to be announced as something to be. It's something that is already happening, that is already proving that it makes a difference. And I think that COP30 have to be about that, has to be about solutions and convincing the economic actors, as you were saying, that there are alternatives to the things that we have been doing and that obviously were designed somehow for a world of very few people that consume. The world was extremely unjust because we now are lifting millions of people out of poverty, and we have to give people what they believe is necessary for their well-being. But so the answers that were to cover only a small proportion of the population cannot be an answer for all the people that now, fortunately, can afford a better life. So we need definitely to use our minds the best way possible to create a world that is realistic, a world that really can bring to people the kind of life that they deserve, and that we have to celebrate, to bring more people to consume in the best sense of the word consumption, and to make sure, obviously, that we think also of the generations to come, always remembering that demography is a key issue. We are going to continue to grow, but up to a certain point. So we can already calculate. It will be probably, you know, in the 70s, people thought that the world population would only decrease when they would attain 14 billion. Now we know it will be around 10 billion and the population is going to decrease. So we can already plan how we can use, how we have to use the resources that we have.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. And thinking of the future implementation and actions, Susanna, I'd like to ask you, biodiversity laws and climate change are deeply interconnected, right? And how can we deliver integrated national solutions to achieve globally agreed climate and natural goals? What is the role of national target settings instruments such as NDCs and NBSAPs, and how should this be aligned?
Yes, this is critical because we have gotten used, and I mean, I used to be part of the Colombian government until March, and in government we have this mindset about making plans and policies, which is a role, but NBSAPs and NDCs do not become real. So what is required to make it real? And we have to go back to that situation of what it means to make these transitions and this change with the real actors in the real territories, with the real power struggles that the changes created. It is not only a technical process. Let's put an example. We know that land use is one of the critical factors in countries like Brazil, like Colombia, where actually we have three things at play. We have biodiversity loss, we have emissions, is our main source of emissions, the change of land use, and at the same time we have adaptation to climate change. So with a single program, a single factor, you can tackle the three things. And so it's very easy to say in plans, let's make adequate use of the land, which means that you use land according to the nature of the land. If the land is for agriculture, use it for agriculture. If the land is for forest, use it for forests. If you're gonna build a city, if you're building city, how the city is reproducing over nature. Now, we can put that in plans. Now let's go to the terrain and talk to the farmers that have the big agribusiness to start shifting the business. Now let's go to the avocado has industry in Colombia that have planted the avocado where forest should be, not the avocado. And let's try to deal with the power structure of the change. And if the political environment is in favor of this capital, including the fossil fuel capital, why we cannot say that we're not going to proliferate fossil fuels in the Amazon? Is the intersection of caring of biodiversity and the fossil fuel economy. Why we as policy and regulators and government cannot reach the fundamental agreement that we should not proliferate fossil fuels in the Amazon, which it is an overshoot of this climate situation. And the reason is because we haven't got it yet the politics and the power to do so. We tried to put this in the Amazon President's meeting 2 years ago, continues to be part of that. So when we try to deal with these issues in reality, and that's what I was working on as minister, I hope the government continues on this path, is actually to bring the actors to the table and face the power struggle of the transition. There are actors that do not want the transition, that will influence the politics to stop the transition. And so the way to be able to move it forward, and I'll come now to a more institutional place, is that it is not enough with the technology, it is not enough with the plans, it is not only enough with the regulation. You need the political process of debate and continuous struggle, sometimes in the streets, sometimes sitting at the table. What is the balance of power that allows this process to work? It's a political, hopefully in a democratic system, negotiation. And now what we're seeing is that the fossil capital is bringing authoritarianism to the world. So it's not becoming even a democratic discussions in some places, but an imposition. And actually, something that has become difficult for the multilateral system as well. So I like to see that each one of these changes, we can put it in plans and everything, but we have to give it blood, sweat, and tears, because it's not going to happen easily. It's a struggle. It's a political struggle.
And talking about political process and players, Ambassador, what international mechanisms and partnerships can scale up the circular economy as a tool for climate mitigation and adaptation?
Well, we have to remember this great difference between it's a big division in the negotiations of climate change between adaptation and mitigation. And for many years, and we've been in that for many years, many people thought, oh, but adaptation, if you concentrate on adaptation, you're not going to stimulate mitigation. This discussion took many years, but the truth is that the acceleration of climate change has completely changed this negotiation. So we have to do the two at the same time. There is no doubt about it. And in our case in Brazil, we had this very traumatic last year in which you had a very clear example of the necessity of mitigation, which was when you saw those rivers without water in the Amazon, the Tapajós and others in the Amazon. And this is something that only mitigation can fight. On the other side, you had the tragedy of Porto Alegre in the south of Brazil, where you had a series of floods that could have been controlled or reduced if adaptation projects had been correctly pursued. So it is very clear today that we have to work with the two. So circular economy has a logic for both. And this is what is really a great contribution, is that We also know that, unfortunately, the international resources for what we need to do are very difficult to obtain, because in the beginning it was thought that with some funds it would be enough for developing countries to do what is necessary. Today you know that without the private sector it's not going to happen. So the circular economy is a way of giving an economic logic to things that will have an enormous impact in mitigation adaptation. Which international organization, which international institutions? Of course, the negotiations are under the Climate Change Convention and the Paris Accord. But the implementation has to be everywhere. That's why we discuss so much circular economy during the Brazilian G20. Because it is the economic logic of circular economy that is an amazing contribution to what we need to do. It is a how-to-do guide, and it makes complete economic logic, and it is being already adopted and efficiently. So I believe that as we expand the implementation of the fight against climate change to all international organizations, we have to also introduce circular economy, as we did in the G20 and in other structures that will support the kind of development that needs to be really applied.
And you know, Ambassador, as a journalist, I believe that stories, storytelling, examples can connect and convince people about what's essential. So my question to Susanna now is, how can countries advance climate action and nature positivity in a circular way, moving from target setting to action? And what are your most inspiring examples, best practice? Can you share with us?
Yes, I think the key is if we are able to demonstrate, and that's where circular economy will be of great contribution, if we can demonstrate that we can decouple economic growth and well-being from material use, resource use. And so far, we have not been yet so good in having like examples, more or less in terms of emissions. In the Climate Convention, you're starting to see some countries that, although they have economic growth, they are reducing emissions. So you start seeing that from the emissions perspective, the decarbonization, but how do we do it from the resource perspective? I think for Latin America, if we can make a revolution on land use, and what I see is that we have a potential revolution, as the first speaker said, on biomass and on livestock, meaning the transitions of proteins. If we could empower bioeconomy, meaning the capacity to use our biodiversity to find what I will call, or what the market calls now, superfoods, and we can reproduce those in a way that the landscape recovers biodiversity, which at the same time will mean for us reducing our emissions because of land use. And that creates an inclusive economy which mimics nature. What does that mean? That doesn't create any residue. When you walk through a forest, the metabolism of nature is amazing. The amount of energy nature uses to reproduce itself, and the amount of synergies that it creates. You can walk through a forest, life is reproducing, metabolic systems are happening, energy is being used, and there is no waste. There's no waste. Nature doesn't produce waste. So if we, through bioeconomy, where we can create an economic revolution, an inclusion revolution, and a regeneration of nature, giving to the North and to ourselves superfoods that replace livestock and all this madness of putting monocrops so that cows can eat, so that then we eat the cows, which is very inefficient in terms of climate biodiversity. I think that's one of the leverages for change where Latin America could be of high contribution. And it's already happening, we're seeing it, but we don't see it at the scale, and we don't see it fast enough. There's many obstacles, but I think there is a potential there where we can create something meaningful. Another example, if we could eliminate landfills from Latin America, which produce methane, pollute water, pollute soil, and through circular economy, bring landfills to its minimum representation or capacity, the contribution on methane emissions that we will be doing could actually be represented in degrees of climate change, of temperature increase. I mean, Latin America could make a revolution through circular economy of waste, eliminating landscapes that could be, as an indicator, represented in 0.2 to 0.3 additional Celsius of increase in climate change. So we do have, and I agree with the ambassador, we do have solutions. Yeah, what do we need? We need the capacity to act regionally at scale. Can countries of Latin America agree on regional programs of bioeconomy for this opportunity, which could be billions of dollars in proteins, and creating forests again, and creating ecosystems, and at the same time eliminating landfills together as a macro program, then the NDCs will have some meaning. Then we can measure the biodiversity shift. Then we can see how we have contributed to temperature. And we have safeguarded the ecosystems that we still have. So the possibility is there, but the question remains, why we cannot do it? What are the, and I still think is more political than anything else. But it's possible.
And maybe we need a strategy or strategies. Ambassador, how can circular economy strategies be designed and implemented to promote just transitions, especially in the global south?
And I think that landfills that you were mentioning, Sun, is absolutely central. Sometimes we don't understand the impact of this kind of change, not only the quality of life of the community, which is obvious, but also on the emissions, because landfills is more than aviation in terms of emissions in the world. So something that is bad for the community, that is useless, and if you apply a logic of circular economy, this can become energy, this can completely change the life of the community, and we have many examples, many examples. So I agree with you that the scale is somehow the secret, and it is very much linked to politics, and I agree totally. And so it is possible. On the other side, I think that since it is linked to politics, it's also linked to the policies that countries present in their NDCs. NDCs are nationally determined, so it's not something that is top-down from the international community that oblige the country to do. The country can present its NDCs in a very constructive way. And I believe that Brazil, when we presented our NDCs and we had a big discussion with all the ministries, because climate involves all the ministries. And what was the element of unity is that people understood that it was not a description of a sacrifice for climate. No, it was a model of development that by incorporating climate was economically more interesting and socially much more just. And that is the issue that the Global South has an immense opportunity, is that we definitely can leapfrog in so many areas, which the developed countries didn't do everything wrong, but almost everything. But we are going to do it much better.
Oh, thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Susanna, for your contributions. Your perspectives will guide us as we move forward. Thank you so very much. And see you soon at COP30. Muito obrigada. Obrigada. Thank you. The video we are about to watch highlights the growing commitment of the private sector to the climate agenda, featuring a groundbreaking initiative led by the Brazilian National Confederation of Industry, CNE, which will be presented at COP30 later this year.
Brazil is hosting the COP30 this year. It's an opportunity for the country to show its leadership on the climate agenda. And the diverse economic sectors, which produce the essentials we use every day, have a key role in driving this change. By actively engaging the productive sector, we can drive the implementation of solutions in climate finance, decarbonization, and energy transition, paving the way for significant progress on our climate goals. That's why industry leaders of the private sector are launching the Sustainable Business COP, the SB COP, an alliance that brings together companies and institutions around the world to foster economic, environmental, and social impact with innovation and collaboration. Do you want to know how the SB COP will work? We're going to bring together companies and institutions to deliver relevant recommendations to government leaders regarding strategic topics. We'll also be presenting innovative solutions and connecting businesses that are investing in the low-carbon economy. That's the power of SB COP, a global initiative aiming to catalyze the private sector efforts on the positive climate agenda. Let's all work together to make COP30 a successful and impactful moment. Sustainable Business COP, strengthening sustainable actions.
We have many reflections today, right, along with exemplary initiatives and solutions that address new challenges. Now it's time to dive deeper into how we can put the circular economy into practice. For this panel, we are pleased to welcome Afkan van Hien from Netherlands Ministry of Environment and International Affairs. Rodrigo Hollenberg from Ministry of the Development, Industry and Commerce. William Dominici from Lenovo. As the moderator, I now invite back to the stage Anis Nassar from World Economic Forum.
Okay, thank you for the introduction again, Juliana. Thanks for joining me on this stage. So we've heard about the context, we've heard about how to integrate circular economy in intergovernmental processes, and now we're going to go a level deeper into the implementation. We're going to look at national policies. How are you, as government leaders, implementing circular economy? How does that help you deliver your nature and climate agendas? And we'll also hear from the private sector. How are you using circular solutions to deliver on your nature and climate targets? So I'll start with you, Vice Minister van Rijn. You're Vice Minister for the Environment and International Affairs of the Netherlands. The Netherlands has been a frontrunner in the implementation of and the designing of circular economy. You have some quite ambitious goals, becoming fully circular by 2050. I think we're all hearing becoming net zero by 2050 a lot. Fully circular by 2050, not as often. You also are aiming to reduce your primary raw materials by 50% by 2030. That is tomorrow. A recent assessment from Circle estimates that the Netherlands is already 25% circular. That's way ahead of the global average of 7 to 9%. So a lot of ambitious goals, good progress already. Can you help us understand what steps you're taking to deliver on these goals and how they contribute to your broader climate and nature targets?
Yes, thank you. And as you mentioned, 25%, it's better than most. So we're proud of that one. But when you look at 2030, 50%, and 2050, 100% fully circular, we still have a long way to go. And even when you look at the 25% of today, it's often in the low value circular strategies. So we have a lot of challenges there as well. And in your presentation, you said 2016, only 4 countries with a the National Circular Economy Plan. We were one of those 4 then. So we started already in 2016 with our national program. And it has evolved from waste policy, but it has gone more and more to the really different kinds of circular economy. And especially maybe looking at the discussion of today is also on the combination of climate and resource management. And that's something we're putting more and more on the agenda. And it was quite hard for us. I mean, to really make the calculation what resource management would do on the climate effect, a challenge. And we managed that as well. So in the Netherlands, we have a climate fund. And we put in several projects in the climate fund. And it will have a footprint, so we'll reduce 2 to 4 megatons CO2. That's quite a lot for the Netherlands. And I'd like to mention 2 of those as an example. First, looking at building, circular building. I mean, when you look at the footprint of building, it's enormous. 37% comes from from the building industry. So we think you have a lot to win when you focus on the building industry. And we did several things. First of all, we worked on an environmental cost indicator. That's, of course, companies can really look into what it will help them if they use the indicator. So it gives you your footprint. And then as well, we set high standards as a government. So public procurement is a very, very important instrument as well. And we expect a lot, and especially as well from substituting different materials. And maybe a second example, that's on plastics, fossil. We often say we want to go to a fossil-free society. But looking at medicines, looking at plastics, you need plastics, but you have to do it another way. So we say we need a sustainable carbon chain, and we should focus on that. So that's recycled content. That's also biomass. It's also captured CO2. So you can build your carbon chain in another way. We put that forward as well in a joint statement with several countries inside the EU. So we will hope that the EU will pick it up and put it inside their Clean Industrial Deal, inside the Circular Economy Act, whatever. But we would really like to put it forward. And another thing is that we, of course, also made our own national vision. You need industry, you need knowledge, you need market, you need a demand. So our national vision really builds further on that. 2 examples.
Thank you, and thank you for mentioning also the evolution of those circular economy action plans. It's true that we have seen earlier that there are 75 of those, and there's still a lot of heterogeneity in terms of what they address. The earlier one, let's say, discuss only waste management, and it's a great first step. But the most ambitious ones look at total material footprint targets, for example, or materiality of GDP. So these are really the most advanced types of plans that we see, and the Netherlands is there. So thanks for sharing those examples as well. I'll move to you, as Secretary Rollenberg. I'll also invite the audience to, if you don't speak Portuguese, wear the translator, because the Secretary is going to answer in Portuguese. So I will do that myself as well. Okay, we're all ready now. Brazil has increasingly been introducing circularity in its sustainability and industrial agendas. We mentioned earlier that in the updated NDC, circular economy is one of the pillars to deliver on this NDC. Of course, we're here today in Brazil to talk about the World Circular Economy Forum, another signal. And also very recently you released the very first national plan for circular economy. Can you tell us about this process and the involvement of the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Services in operationalizing these strategies?
Bom, muito obrigado, boa tarde a todas e a todos. É uma imensa honra poder estar participando desse evento. Quero cumprimentar o Fundo Finlandês, cumprimentar a CNI, cumprimentar a Fiesp. Eu faço em nome do Calil, que se dedicou de corpo e alma para a organização desse evento, e dizer que é muito bom poder ouvir experiências de outros países, aprender, trocar essas experiências e um pouco dizer dos avanços do Brasil, porque ao reconhecer esses avanços nos anima a avançar mais. Embora saibamos que temos muitos desafios, é importante registrar nessa conjuntura atual que o Brasil reduziu em 50% o desmatamento na Amazônia. Hoje nós temos uma matriz energética 50% de origem renovável, uma matriz elétrica que chegou a 93% de origem renovável. Nós reduzimos nossas emissões em 12% e o país está crescendo. Além disso, nós avançamos enormemente numa agenda regulatória que vai contribuir para o ambiente de desenvolvimento da economia circular. Nós aprovamos a regulamentação do mercado de carbono, e é claro que ao introduzir práticas circulares, isso vai gerar créditos de carbono. Nós aprovamos um projeto que eu considero revolucionário, que é o combustível do futuro, que garante o aumento da mistura do etanol na gasolina, do biodiesel no diesel fóssil, garante mandatos de mistura do biometano no gás natural, também mandatos de redução de emissões na aviação através da utilização de combustível sustentável de aviação. Nós aprovamos a regulamentação do hidrogênio, a regulamentação das eólicas offshore e uma política nacional de bioinsumos. Isso no plano legal. No plano infralegal, nós aprovamos uma estratégia nacional de descarbonização industrial e acabamos de lançar o Plano Nacional de Economia Circular. Aprovamos a Estratégia Nacional de Economia Circular, acabamos de aprovar o Plano Nacional de Economia Circular, que tem 5 pilares. O primeiro, o ambiente institucional e normativo. O segundo, o estímulo à ciência, tecnologia, soluções tecnológicas. O terceiro é a redução de resíduos, a redução da utilização de materiais primários e aumento da utilização da reciclagem. O quarto, financiamento. E o quinto, a interlocução, a articulação interfederativa e a incorporação dos trabalhadores, especialmente das cooperativas de catadores. Mas, além disso, nós, na próxima semana, colocamos em consulta, e esse plano é importante registrar, ele foi feito e aprovado com a participação de 1.627 contribuições na consulta pública, mostrando como esse tema já está permeando o interesse da sociedade. Na próxima semana, a gente coloca em consulta pública a parte de sociobioeconomia da Política Nacional de Bioeconomia, e no final do mês a gente lança a Estratégia Nacional de Descarbonização Industrial dos setores intensivos em energia e de difícil abatimento, aço, cimento, química, vidros, papel e celulose e alumínio, e que tem na economia circular um dos instrumentos fundamentais para reduzir as suas emissões. Além disso, nós estamos construindo a taxonomia sustentável e, mais uma vez, o tema da circularidade vai ser extremamente importante, e o selo verde, para certificar aqueles produtos, né, que sejam sustentáveis, e um dos critérios para certificar a sustentabilidade será o de circularidade. Além disso, o governo tem, através da Agência Brasileira de Desenvolvimento Industrial, o Recircula, que eu gostaria de convidar todos para passarem depois no estande da BDI para conhecer, que é uma plataforma que consegue identificar todo o percurso dos materiais recicláveis, ou seja, identificar como está sendo utilizado pela indústria, e se faz isso através das notas fiscais eletrônicas, ou seja, com uma integridade muito grande, faz todo o processo de rastreabilidade da circularidade nas cadeias produtivas. Começou com o plástico, já está indo para o alumínio, e a ideia é fazer em todas as cadeias produtivas. Então, efetivamente, a gente tem avançado muito nesse processo regulatório, que eu entendo que é o primeiro passo para que a gente tenha a efetivação, né, de uma nova economia, de uma economia circular. É claro que temos agora o desafio da implementação, mas ao ter ali os macro-objetivos, essas diversas ações, a gente tem os direcionamentos, tem os instrumentos para direcionar as políticas públicas, sejam elas de crédito, sejam elas de desenvolvimento científico e tecnológico ou de compras públicas.
Thank you for taking us through this rather comprehensive plan already for our first strategy. Now I'll turn on to the private sector. William, you're representing the whole private sector by yourself on this stand. So you're Director of PC and Smart Device Strategy at Lenovo. Lenovo is, of course, the world's largest PC manufacturer. You're a major player in global technology supply chains, and you're accelerating towards your net zero 2050 target. Can you help us understand first how, within your own operations, you're using circular economy to deliver these climate and nature goals?
Boa tarde e obrigado. I'm very happy to be here speaking today, and if I may, I'll use my notes a bit, because I'm not much of a linear thinker, and sometimes hard to follow. You may not know me, but if you know Motorola and in Lenovo, the #1 PC manufacturer in the world for over a decade, then you've seen the work of my team. We're the ones who've designed and built the business strategy behind the success, quietly, deliberately, year after year. We haven't sought the spotlight. We've been focused on making it work and making it last. And as part of our mission, my team has been charged with building the sustainability KPIs to achieve Lenovo's 2050 net zero goals, and we're well on the way. I'm here today because I've come to realize that the next era of business leadership, especially in a resource-constrained world, can't be built in silos. If we want to create a new system of value, one that supports a truly circular economy, it's going to take collaboration across industries, across governments, and across time horizons. That's why I'm speaking today, and that's the future I want to help design. Now back to your question. How are we embedding circular economy and climate and nature goals in our strategy and operations? My team operates at the intersection of technology and new business models, where circularity sits. We're focused on looking at how can we redesign how value is created, captured, and sustained. And we've organized our circularity strategy around what we call a real framework: responsible design, ethical materials, accountable models, and life cycle intelligence. Responsible design means building durability, modularity, and repairability from the start. For example, in one of our best-selling products, the ThinkPad T14, it scores on a third-party at a 9 out of 10 in a repairability index, and that's pretty powerful as we look at making sure not only that our systems have longevity, but they're able to be self-repaired with our customers. Secondly, around ethical materials means sourcing and designing with intention, using recycled carbon fiber from Boeing. Aircraft we've integrated in our systems. We've also integrated closed-loop plastics in both our PCs as well as in the new Motorola phone that's launched called the Edge. Accountable models. This includes things like device as a service, new business models looking at how we manage life cycle across the life of the product. And also, though, embedding in that services like asset recovery, so we can take the products back, and then ultimately certified refurbished services where we are actually able to put the products back out into the environment in a second life. And so we're starting to evolve the way we think about product management, not just first life, but second life and beyond. And I think that's extremely important. And then finally, life cycle intelligence is where everything connects. We are shifting the way we look at our product carbon footprints from a PIA methodology that's well known in the industry to a more accurate life cycle assessment model. In doing so, we're able to leverage AI. We're able to better understand and look up into our supply chain and provide transparency in our supply chain to our customers. And also, it allows us to design better products because we're able to create digital twins of our products and understand what levers we can pull to impact the product life cycle and longevity. So we are building a resilient, scalable, circular system, one that can adapt and grow and endure.
Thanks for this answer, William. You mentioned multiple times the supply chain, and we know that circular economy is not something that can be achieved by yourself as an organization, however big you are. So your influence on the supply chain must be quite big, given your size and your scale. Can you tell us how you use this leadership to create more circular supply chains beyond your own walls?
Sure. So when we see that circularity can't be achieved in isolation, and it requires an ecosystem mindset. As we leverage things like LCA methodology, we are working with our suppliers to have more transparency in terms of the materials, the work, etc. And we've also actively involving our partner system and really across our value chain is really the way we think about it. So it's up into what we're doing with procurement, but it's also looking at how we're building our business models around things like asset recovery, things as well as our device as a service. But then finally, but one more thing I want to also mention though, as we look at what we've done with asset recovery in terms of a metric, since 2020, we've diverted over 94,000 metric tons from landfills. That equates to about 87 million think pads, and we continue to build off of that. But we can't do this in isolation. We work with our partners across the globe. We continue to expand our asset recovery services throughout Europe, into India, China, as well as the US, and into Latin America. And finally, through our partner program, we have a Lenovo 360 partner program where we share our best practices around circularity, around sustainability across our partner chain because we are dependent both on our partners to deliver products in a first life, but also in terms of asset recovery and bringing them back.
Thank you. I'll turn back to Secretary Rollenberg. Brazil is also a quite resource-based economy. And this, for some, could sound like a contradiction with a circular economy. Can you tell us the opportunities and the challenges that you have in applying circular economy to more traditional sectors like mining, agriculture, and to some degree manufacturing to deliver on nature and climate targets there?
Bom, eu vejo que nós temos muitos desafios na mineração, muitas oportunidades na agricultura e uma necessidade na indústria. A mineração brasileira produz em torno de 5 milhões de toneladas de resíduos por ano. No ano de 2023, conseguiu reutilizar em torno de 70%, 3 milhões e meio. Mas esse é um desafio ainda logístico muito grande. Tem avançado na questão do reuso de água, tem avançado na utilização de resíduos para construção civil, utilizar parte desses resíduos de pó de rocha na restauração, na agricultura regenerativa associada a bioinsumos. Já na agricultura, eu vejo uma oportunidade gigantesca. É importante registrar que a agricultura brasileira, através do isolamento de uma bactéria fixadora de nitrogênio no solo por uma pesquisadora da Embrapa chamada Joana Dobenheim, que foi indicada para o Prêmio Nobel da Paz, Hoje nós economizamos em torno de 19 bilhões de reais por ano por não precisar comprar adubos nitrogenados para produzir a soja, porque essa bactéria faz esse trabalho de fixar o nitrogênio no solo. Mas, além disso, ela deixa de emitir, pelo não uso do nitrogênio, o óxido nitroso, que é um óxido, que é um gás extremamente potente para o aquecimento global. Eu estou dizendo isso para mostrar as imensas oportunidades que o desenvolvimento dos bioinsumos, e o Brasil hoje já é o país que mais produz e mais consome bioinsumos, pode contribuir para uma agricultura regenerativa que abra mão de insumos químicos importados, que vêm de longe, que gastam muito combustível, com um peso na balança comercial e um peso no aquecimento global. Do ponto de vista da abundância de biomassa, o Brasil hoje tem um potencial de produção de 30 bilhões de metros cúbicos diários de biometano a partir da biomassa de resíduos da nossa agricultura e de nossa pecuária. Portanto, eu vejo uma oportunidade gigantesca da agricultura brasileira se tornar cada vez mais sustentável. É importante registrar para o mundo que nós temos uma agricultura que tem código florestal, que tem tecnologias de integração lavoura, pecuária, floresta, que tem plantio direto e que tem utilização intensiva de bioinsumos. No caso da indústria intensiva em energia, e essa é uma das grandes preocupações da nova indústria Brasil, liderada pelo vice-presidente e ministro Geraldo Alckmin, através da missão número 5, bioeconomia, descarbonização e transição e segurança energética, é descarbonizar a indústria gerando oportunidades. Ou seja, nós temos a indústria da transição energética, com a possibilidade de produção de biometano, de combustível sustentável de aviação, de hidrogênio, a partir de várias rotas tecnológicas, através de processo de eletrólise, a partir da reforma do etanol. Mas nós temos também o desafio de descarbonizar as indústrias pesadas. E aí a economia circular, ela aparece como uma grande oportunidade, grande alternativa, a mais barata, a mais eficiente, a mais rápida de descarbonizar os setores industriais. No Brasil, hoje, nós reciclamos quase 100% dessas latinhas, e fundamental para a indústria do alumínio, que faz com que o alumínio brasileiro tenha uma pegada de carbono que é 1/3 da média mundial. Na indústria do cimento, nós já utilizamos hoje em torno de 32%, já substituímos 32% do clinker através da utilização de biomassa ou de resíduos urbanos. Já tem empresa no Brasil de cimento hoje que já substituiu 70% do clinker por outras alternativas. Então, eu vejo que nós temos grandes oportunidades. O que é fundamental agora, e a nova indústria Brasil procura fazer isso, é garantir os instrumentos para colocar em prática todos esses projetos. E é importante registrar que desde o início do governo do presidente Lula, nós descontingenciamos 100% dos recursos do Fundo Nacional do Desenvolvimento Científico e Tecnológico. Hoje tem um orçamento de 14 bilhões, metade reembolsável e metade não reembolsável. E dos recursos não reembolsáveis, tem recurso de subvenção econômica direto nas empresas para o desenvolvimento de tecnologias disruptivas. E entre essas possibilidades está a economia circular. Portanto, aliar a questão de um crédito, o crédito mais barato, temos o Fundo Clima, a partir de uma captação de títulos verdes com juros mais baratos para a economia circular. A partir dos instrumentos do foco em ciência, tecnologia e inovação. E a partir dos instrumentos da compra pública, e o selo verde vai ser um componente importante, nós estamos garantindo os instrumentos para efetivamente implementar uma nova economia no Brasil, que já tem, em relação ao resto do mundo, uma economia bastante sustentável.
So a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunity there. And I'd like to turn to you again, Afke, for a closing word on this panel before we move to the last keynote. So we've talked about how we collaborate on circular economy, we've talked about how we implement, and I'd like to ask you a question that's a bit more forward-looking in terms of what we might be missing to collaborate better. So particularly, what mechanisms could the international community use to foster better international collaboration on materials? We've seen earlier that, for example, only 27% of NDCs cite the circular economy today. Should we go to 100%? And do we need other collaboration mechanisms for material use and circular economy?
When you ask me, should we go to 100%, I would say yes immediately. So for the NDCs, I think it's crucial to really put circular economy in the plan as well. And so I think I'm very glad that the 3 UN organizations, so UNEP and UNDP and UNFCCC, they made the NDC Circular Economy Toolbox. And I think that's very useful. So countries that want to make their NDC, they can really use it's a practical toolbox that will help you to put it into the to your plan. But then putting it into plan, it's one thing. But you said in your speech it was 60% increase in resource use by 2060. I mean, the challenge is enormous. We need more. And so that's going to your second question, because to keep our climate goals in reach, we really need a global transformation towards a sustainable use of materials. And there are a lot of questions and challenges there. I mean, our trade system nowadays between countries, is that the right system? Or resource-rich countries and good social, economic, or just transition, whatever you want to say, do we do it in the right way? Or when you look at business plans, circular financing, shouldn't we de-risk circular financing compared to linear financing? So we have a lot of challenges and a lot of topics we have to tackle to go there. And your question was, should we get, do we need other mechanisms for material collaboration? I think we do. I think we really have to look at a new governance system. I mean, inside a country, it's already a question how do you organize your circular economy in the best way? Between countries, the same. When you really want to get all the, for example, the critical materials, should every country do it for themselves? Or do you want to have a system there as well? And the same question for the global, for more global questions. So I think it's time to look into mechanisms for material collaboration. But what's the best way? That's a challenge. So we're not there yet, but for us, very important.
So still a lot of work for all of us to figure out what these mechanisms will be. So I'll invite the audience to applaud our panelists. Thanks for joining us, and we'll hand over to Juliana and Cleanne.
Thank you all for the excellent debate. Now it's time to hear from the co-chair of the International Resource Panel, Yaneti Patotinik.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Dear friends, as you have heard, I'm a co-chair of the International Resource Panel, which is officially a scientific backbone of World Circular Economy Forum. So a few hundred meters from here, we have organized this week also the meeting of International Resource Panel. And we choose this date because we wanted to be present here. And many of my colleagues are also today in the audience. But actually my point is to talk about some essential things which would be critical for a circular economy to become a norm. We are living in strange times. I doubt that anybody from you would disagree with that statement. So it's pretty important basically to return to the essence of human science, which is philosophy. Georg Hegel said the only thing we can learn from history is that we learn nothing from history. And unfortunately, the time in which we are living is close to that. And My colleague from Slovenia, Slavoj Žižek, added, political issues are too serious to be left only to politicians. That is why it's good that you are here today. So let us clarify at the beginning, is the system change transformation direction, is the sustainability in the interest of the private sector? You have heard from World Economic Forum already, but this is officially a survey which they are doing each year in World Economic Forum, where they are asking business leaders, what are the most important global risks you are facing? In 10 years, first, extreme weather events. Second, biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse. Third, critical change to Earth systems. Fourth, natural resource shortages. So the answer is yes. And the question is really, why are they not able to implement that in practice? You have already heard that from IRP that 60% of global change climate impacts, 40% of pollution impacts, and more than 90% of water stress and land-related biodiversity loss can be attributed only to extraction and processing of materials. So this is driving the triple planetary crisis. If we look to who is consuming those resources and what the impacts are, high-income countries are consuming 6 times more materials per capita than low-income countries and have 10 times more climate impact than low-income countries. Things are moving very fast in middle-income countries, but the real tragedy is low-income countries where the things are actually not moving at all. So our advice, scientific advice from the IRP is this one. We need to decouple well-being growth. It needs to be higher than actually economic growth, altogether from resource use and altogether from environmental impacts. When doing so, looking to all natural resources and focusing on those who are most resource intensive, which are basically nutrition, built environment, mobility, and energy. So, circular economy, which we are dealing with today, it's basically an instrument to deliver that decoupling. You can also see it as part of a bigger picture of economic, societal, cultural transformation if you want to deliver SDGs and other international commitments. Circular economy is using common sense. It's the oldest concept on the planet Earth. Because all nature is basically organized in circular principles. Nothing is lost. Everything has its purpose. So the only question is basically, are we humans part of nature? And if we are part of nature, why the hell we are not behaving according to the nature rules? So, COP30, it's really needing a strong leadership. And it is good that it's in the Brazilian hands. Why would it be critical to integrate circular economy solutions better in our international climate efforts, and how this should be done? If we just quickly touch the climate where we are currently standing, and I'm here going to my good friend Slavoj Žižek again. In short, the truly courageous stance is to admit that the light at the end of the tunnel is most probably the headlight of the train approaching us from the other side. So, you know, some climate change facts are simply quite worrying. Global CO2 emissions last year, the highest ever. Global surface temperature increased above pre-industrial level 1.5 to 1.7 on a monthly basis. These are facts. And we don't hear many people panicking, by the way. The system that moves water around the world is off balance for the first time in human history, according to science. Fossil fuel subsidies, according to IMF, 7.1% of GDP still. Come on, is this serious? So I think it's really important to understand energy transition is critical and important, also technological development. But energy could be used for good or for the bad purposes. And that's where you need circular economy, that it's used for the good purposes. Climate breakdown, it's a symptom of ecological overshoot. Material footprint, it's dangerously under-discussed. most climate solutions lack focus on the root causes of the crisis, and a focus on overshoot is actually highlighting material usage, including fossil fuels. It's highlighting the waste output, which is a consequence of still prevailing wasteful linear economy, and of course, growth of human society, which has more than doubled in the last 50 years. All that is a pressure on the climate change. So if you really want to address it, then you need to combine supply-side solutions, which are today getting most of the attention, so energy transition, GHG handling, with decoupling, demand-side solutions, circular economy, and of course, nature-based solutions. So that's actually the way to go. Today, we are pretty much in orange. Let us talk about demand-side solutions, and here is the call of action which I want to talk about today. It's the call from Isabella, which is my co-chair, your colleague from Brazil. And what are we basically asking? We are asking, this is based on the recommendation of the Global Resource Outlook 24, so IRP work. We are asking international organizations to follow 4 essential missions. Better orientation, national material use targets and scientific guidance, including a global orientation value, should be established. Second, better measurement, indicators measuring the ability of provisioning systems to meet people's needs in material efficient way. Better economic incentives, policy fiscal reforms to reflect environmental social costs in material prices and to shift subsidies. And finally, mission 4, better transparency and coordination, access to consolidated material flow and impact data, which we suggest that it should be provided by some new institution like International Materials Agency. I will focus a bit, very quickly, just on 2 of those, number 1 and number 4. When we define resource use path, so it is essential to understand that high-income countries' per capita use of materials needs to go down, because it's simply too high. And when we talk about material footprint, we do not talk about countries which are rich in resources, but countries which spend in their consumption most of the resources. So they also have high-level stocks, meaning cities are built, infrastructure is built, while low-income countries still need to meet their essential human needs, and they need more of those resources. So they need to increase that, but when they will be growing, they should include resource productivity and circularity measures, not to repeat some of the mistakes as we have heard before, like we have done. So this is entirely consistent with the logic which IRP is preaching. Absolute decoupling for high-income countries and relative decoupling for low-income countries. 2 countries, Germany and Australia, have introduced material footprint only December last year. So it's really great to see seeing that this is essential and important. Why science-based material targets would be important? And this is probably the most important slide. First, because it would give natural resources, material management, circularity, proper recognition and attention in policy space. It is not existing, I can guarantee you. Second, it would provide a clear signal to all government departments that they have to introduce that in their logic. And it would provide important incentive to private sector for innovation related to all aspects of circularity. Next, complement efficiency with sufficiency policies. Decarbonization with dematerialization. Because if you do dematerialization, decarbonization will be easier. Introduce demand-side solutions. It would contribute to the autonomy competitiveness of the countries. Introduce, in particular in international policy, debates essential who is crossing planetary boundaries through excessive resource use in production and consumption. And finally, it would effectively address the equity and fairness globally, as well as on national levels. So start closing the gap among existing global north and global south. That's why introducing that kind of material targets would be so essential. So, material agency might be a game changer. We don't have today doors on which any of you or any country would knock if it would like to get a clear vision where we are with material use and where we want to go. So on one hand, core function should be user-friendly access to consolidated high-quality data. It could be resilience navigator, exploring the country-level risks and opportunities. It could be policy monitor, real-time monitoring of global policy developments and impact assessments. So the most frequent answer which I get when I'm starting to present those things is this one. This is not the right time when policymakers would be ready to set new targets or introduce new institutions. You know, the answer is pretty straightforward. This is not about new targets. This is about implementation measures that we can actually deliver the targets which we have agreed, because otherwise we will simply not deliver them. In COP for climate, in biodiversity COP, or in the SDGs if you want. So, momentum is there. Together with CSIRO and Systemic, we are working already very heavily on better orientation, together with partners from International Chamber of Commerce, so basically really having a heavy business voice behind, and Chatham House, we are working on the idea of the International Monetary Agency. By the way, we will organize side event on Thursday, and anybody who would you are all welcome to join if you think that that is a good thing to push. To conclude, I'm practically half of my life, if not more, in policy making. It's very simple in policy making. You have two things in your hands. One is market signals, another is regulation. So what is happening with market signals today? Market signals are leading us, consumers and producers, as you know. But our current system does not incentivize sustainable resource use. Actually, quite the opposite. We should stop signaling producers that extraction-based economic success is most profitable. And we are giving a contradictory signal to consumers: be responsible, but sorry, you will have to pay more. So it's totally against what we are teaching in our economic faculties. And regulation, which is your second tool, is setting a clear vision designed by policymakers based on science and public interest. But if you are sending regulation this way and market signals this way, what you get on the market is a lot of confusion by producers and consumers. And at the end, also a lot of mixed feelings. So there are basically two ways to make circular economy a reality. One is fixing market signals and making circular economy attractive, because today it is not attractive. That's the major problem of circular economy. And or through regulation, setting clear science-based direction. That's why this call was actually prepared to help you, the growing circular economy community. So all four missions are equally important, and some of our partners are already working on others. But if you also doubt that we might be struggling fixing market signals soon, or even if you don't, you should add your name and sign the IRP co-chair's call to action. So, give a clear message to policymakers. Many excellent examples of circular economy practice are needed and are encouraging. But to make circular economy a norm, we need a system change. And I think it's the most appropriate to use here the quote from Brazilian Mario Quintana: "Don't waste time chasing butterflies, mend your garden, and the butterflies will come." So, if I conclude, essential to remember it's this: strong minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, weak minds discuss people. Don't discuss why and how you can't do it because of the others. Do it. This is where you can basically, here you have the QR code for the call to action. The other is QR code for International Materials Agency side event if you would like to join or add your voice to what we are doing. You know, dear friends, we are terribly indebting future generations, financially and by depleting the nature. This is simply wrong, and we know it. Apparently, we humans are the most intelligent species on the planet. Isn't high time to prove it? The future will be green and more equal, or there will be no future. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Yes, we are living strange times, right? But I love the call to action, and I feel we already have butterflies here. Innovations are truly what are transforming production methods with new materials and technologies that increase efficiency and reduce waste. Our next speaker will tell us more about these challenges. Please welcome to the stage Dan Yoshpe, Vice President of FIESP and champion of COP30. Please, Dan. Thank you. Here? Please. How are you doing? So you think we are living in strange times as well?
More or less. I'm very optimistic.
Oh, good. We need hope. Dan, I'd like to start asking you, can circular economy accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy and contribute to climate goals? What do you think?
Sure, and I think we just saw amazing explanations, examples, rationale behind what we should do and what we know how to do. And that's sort of what we really need. I think as Ambassador André said, and many of the colleagues, we just heard the call for action, so we need to go for the implementation. And circular economy is one of the leading tools or solutions or strategies. Our secretary also mentioned the hard-to-abate industries and how can we address this subject around the world and in Brazil as well. And for sure, circular economy is the #1 strategy for those, and this is one of the relevant areas that we need to address. We have some easier areas and tougher areas, and then circular economy, by the way, comes very helpful on the tougher areas. Of course, there's usages also on easier routes, but we need it. And now is the time to implement, to be more on this optimism or pessimism. I think we are more or less in the middle of the game. We didn't lose, we didn't win. There is good opportunity, but we need to work much harder than we already did itself, and because of this match that Brazil can bring to the subject, and how can we show the world among our peer countries new solutions, new strategies, and how to address our very relevant problems.
One of the issues is about how to finance countries to fight the climate crisis, right? And what are your expectations of the productive sector for the next COP30 in Belém, considering the current levels of climate finance and what happened in the past months?
Of course, that's a very challenging subject, but again, that's my personal view, as we move forward with great solutions, very good projects, we will probably be surprised with additional funding, additional finance, additional insurance strategies and so forth that can come up. And once we bring scale and economic sense to some of these routes, they may become independent, they may become self-sufficient, and which would allow resources to flow to other areas, not necessarily on mitigation, maybe on adaptation and resilience, where we will not see economic results or logic so soon in the process. So again, it is very challenging. I think COP30 has this need to establish the route from Baku to Belém. There is like $1 trillion gap. But on the middle of the way, I think we are going to find very interesting new solutions that we may not know yet. I think, for instance, the TFFF, which is a brand new structure, which comes for forests and to do a major effort on the mitigation and social development area. I don't know exactly where this is going to end financially, but I think it's going to be very positive, and it may surprise us. When we look to biofuels in Brazil, it's a fairly mature business by now. Has its own economic model and can surprise us as well in terms of new developments and move forward than we would expect. So I think we have to struggle and try to find ways to get to this 1.3 trillion or hopefully even more. But at the same time, let's make sure that we are looking at any opportunity and being creative enough and bringing the private sector as well to the table. And also, one point that I think is coming back, I would like it to come back fairly strong, is the debate on carbon credits. That could be a very interesting offsetting mechanism to take the financial resources to the right place or to the most productive place of the table. And hopefully we can find also some initiatives or breakthroughs in this Brazilian COP cycle.
I do hope so. Okay, thank you so very much. And with that, we wrap up the first day of WCEF. Thank you all so much for your participation. Thank you, Dan, so much.
Thank you very much.
Well, and I truly hope to see you soon again tomorrow. We'll be starting at the same time as today at 9:30 a.m. Please don't forget to bring your badge, but the day is not over yet. We are all invited to celebrate the gathering, keep exchanging ideas, and making new connections at our happy hour at the OCA. Enjoy it, and see you tomorrow.